When we think of the Pokémon franchise, we often think of video games, the anime, and above all, the significant economic machine that is the Pokémon Company. But in their merchandising efforts, this company has produced more than just plush toys and trading cards. Long before the arrival of Red and Blue in Europe, they released a manga written by Hidenori Kusaka, chronicling the adventure of Red. In Japanese, it's called Poké Special, translated into English as Pokémon Adventures. What makes it particularly interesting is that while the anime presented a more naive, childlike version of Red, renamed Ash, Pokémon Adventures portrays a character much closer to the one we play as in the video games. Generally speaking, the story also stays truer to the original material. It's worth noting that, at the time, Game Freak had no intention of creating games to sell manga or plushies. I decided to dive into this medium, which celebrated its 25th anniversary, after receiving numerous comments praising the quality of this Japanese comic. The first thing I noticed was that, among the 60 volumes released, the main character changes over time. For example, the first arc spans 6 volumes and covers the Kanto region, but starting with the 4th volume, the focus shifts from Red to Yellow, a new protagonist more similar to the character we play, as in Pokémon Yellow. This pattern continues in the later volumes, where we follow characters like Gold, Crystal, and others. The manga even revisits the perspectives of Red, Green, and other previous protagonists in volumes based on Fire Red and Leaf Green. Overall, the continuity in these adventures is strong enough that many Pokémon fans consider this story to be their personal canon for the Pokémon universe. So far, I've only finished the first volume, but I felt compelled to make a video about it to share my thoughts as I progress. I also wanted to spark discussions in the comments with those who want to start or revisit this manga alongside me. For those who want to avoid spoilers for the beginning of the story, I've included a link in the description to the first volumes. Feel free to check them out if you're planning to read the manga. For those who simply want a refresher or to learn more about the story, here's a summary of the first volume. You can skip this part and go straight to my thoughts if you prefer. The story begins in the peaceful Pallet Town, where some children are trying to catch a Nidorino. After failing, a young trainer explains that this isn't how it works. You first need to weaken the Pokemon before throwing a Pokeball. To demonstrate, he sends out his Poliwhirl and confidently orders it to use Water Gun. The Nidorino takes damage, becoming dazed, and the trainer successfully captures it. The kids cheer for the trainer, who is well known as Red. He appears confident, perhaps even cocky, and begins explaining what Pokemon are. His goal? To catch them all, but when the kids ask if he knows Professor Oak, a renowned Pokemon expert, Red dismisses him as an old man who isn't of much use. He claims that if anyone needs to learn something, Red himself is more than capable of teaching them. Apparently, Professor Oak's grandson has just returned from a trip outside the region. After saying goodbye to the kids, Red later stumbles upon a group of people dressed in black who seem to be Pokemon trainers. They are searching for something, a certain ghost Pokemon. Intrigued, Red decides to follow them as they head into the western forest. He plans to catch the ghost Pokemon himself before they do. Equipped with a stock of Pokeballs, Red ventures into the forest, only to encounter another trainer who seems to be ahead of him. This person has a Charmander, clearly making them a trainer as well. They engage in battle with a mysterious Pokemon, and Red is impressed by their skill. Intrigued, he steps forward to ask the trainer why they recalled their Charmander mid-battle. Before they can answer, Red sends out his Poliwhirl and orders it to use Water Gun. A battle ensues against the mysterious Pokemon, but it doesn't last long. Poliwhirl is quickly knocked out, and the Pokemon escapes. While Red tends to his fainted Pokemon, the other trainer explains why they withdrew their Charmander. They realized the opposing Pokemon was far too strong and didn't want to sabotage themselves. Red, stunned by his defeat, reflects on the lesson. A little while later, the people in black return, drawn by signs of a recent battle. They recognize Red from a previous encounter and are visibly annoyed. However, instead of dealing with him, they continue their search for a Mew, believing it to be nearby. Afterward, Red finds himself near a building that he identifies as the Professor's Lab. Reluctant to seek out Professor Oak, he ultimately decides to do so, realizing that if he wants to become the best trainer, he might need the Professor's guidance. When he rings the doorbell and gets no answer, he notices that the door is open. He steps inside and is immediately impressed by the lab's collection of Pokeballs. One in particular catches his eye, Bulbasaur's Pokeball. He picks it up and compares it to his Poliwhirls, only to be startled by Professor Oak, who accuses Red of being a Pokemon thief. In his shock, Red stumbles backward, triggering a chain reaction that causes several Pokeballs on a shelf to open. Many Pokemon escape, and one even relieves itself on the Professor. While Oak scrambles to recapture them, some Pokemon manage to flee. Red volunteers to retrieve them to make up for his mistake, though initially skeptical. Oak agrees, warning that they'll continue the search into the night if necessary. In Viridian City, Red captures a cat-like Pokemon, leaving only one left to find, Bulbasaur. They trace it to the Viridian Gym, which is locked. However, Red manages to enter, where he finds Bulbasaur waiting for Professor Oak. After speaking to it, Red seems to calm the Pokemon, but the duo is then startled by a Machop that attacks them. At the last moment, Bulbasaur uses Vine Whip to prevent Machop from hitting Red, and while Professor Oak is still out of commission, Red must devise a solution to deal with the threat in the arena. He notices small holes in the wooden slats that let sunlight into the area. He orders Bulbasaur to try using the sunlight, and the grass-type Pokemon unleashes a powerful attack that sends the fighting Pokemon crashing to the ground with a cry. Professor Oak is impressed. Red deduced that because Bulbasaur has a bulb, it can use Solar Beam under sunlight, which leads Oak to gift him the Pokemon. Red then explains that he came to the lab not to steal, but to ask Professor Oak to teach him how to become a better trainer. He recounts his encounter with Mew, and the first piece of advice Professor Oak offers is that to be a great trainer, one doesn't need strong Pokemon or clever battle strategies, but a connection from the heart. Oak saw this connection between between Red and Bulbasaur. He then gives Red the Pokédex, a kind of digital Pokémon encyclopedia. By completing it, Red could become one of the best trainers, inspiring him to take on the challenge. However, to fill the Pokédex, Red can't stay in Pallet Town. He must explore. As a starting point, Professor Oak recommends Viridian Forest, a place teeming with Pokémon he hasn't seen before. Meanwhile, in Viridian Forest, a mysterious boy has just knocked out a Venomoth with his Charmander. He looks bored, remarking that he already has that Pokémon in his Pokédex. He's searching for a specific Pokémon, and back with Red, we see him using his Poliwhirl to look for a Caterpie. Suddenly, Poliwhirl is knocked out by the same Charmander from before. It turns out that Poliwhirl belongs to someone else. It attacked the water type because it was mistaken for a wild Pokémon. Furious, Red wants revenge, but the boy advises against it, pointing out that both of them are Pokémon trainers searching for Pokémon and were bound to cross paths. Red then recognizes him as the trainer who lectured him after his defeat by Mew. Suddenly, the two boys hear a noise. Red's rival smirks. It's the Pokémon he has been looking for. Kangaskhan, Charmander attacks, and during the battle, Red notices the rival also has a Pokédex. In their conversation, Red realizes the boy is Professor Oak's grandson. The fight continues, and after weakening Kangaskhan, the rival trainer tries to capture it. However, the Pokémon's immense strength lets it repel the Pokéballs. Red quickly figures out why, and tells the rival to stop attacking, but the boy refuses, claiming it's his Pokémon to capture. Taking matters into his own hands, Red calls on Poliwhirl to knock Charmander aside, and then rushes to Kangaskhan to check if its baby is alright. He discovers that the Pokémon in Kangaskhan's pouch has been poisoned. Red heals the baby, and the mother Kangaskhan flees under the rival's angry glare. The boys then formally introduce themselves, with Oak's grandson revealing his name is Green. They part ways, though it's clear they'll meet again. In the western part of Pewter City, there's a commotion as people chase after something. Red notices a poster showing a wanted Pokémon. It has been stealing food from the townsfolk. When it's captured, the Pokémon escapes again by releasing an electric shock. Red witnesses the scene and decides to capture it himself. He sends out his Bulbasaur to battle the electric mouse. It attempts to zap Bulbasaur, but the grass-type Pokémon resists the attack and counters with poison powder. Red then throws a Pokeball, successfully capturing the Pokémon. Grateful, the townsfolk offer Red food. As he checks the new Pokémon's data, he realizes the Pikachu is from Viridian Forest. Later, Red notices Pikachu trying to escape its Pokeball, and it exhibits a strong-willed, stubborn personality. Red even gets shocked by Pikachu. Much to Green's amusement, the two trainers decide to have a battle, but before they begin, Green informs Red that the city has a Pokemon gym, and its leader, Brock, is looking for strong challengers. Green plans to earn the Boulder Badge, which boosts Pokemon attacks once acquired. He proposes a competition to see who can defeat Brock first. The next tournament is scheduled for noon the following day, and since Red's Pokemon are exhausted, he plans to heal them at the Pokemon Center the next morning. Unfortunately, Red learns the next day that the Pokemon Center has been vandalized, leaving him with only Pikachu in good health. Determined, he heads to the gym. In the preliminary rounds, Red faces a trainer with a Graveler, making it difficult to rely on his electric mouse. Instead, he uses his weakened Poliwhirl, hoping to finish the opponent quickly. With an Ice Beam, he succeeds. Later, the announcer declares that Red has defeated all his opponents, primarily using Poliwhirl's Water-type moves and Bulbasaur's Grass-type attacks. Brock, having observed the battles, steps up to challenge Red. However, with both Poliwhirl and Bulbasaur worn out, Red pleads with Pikachu to fight. Brock begins with Onix, who launches Rock Throw to strike Pikachu. The attack lands, enraging Pikachu, who shocks Red in frustration. Disappointed, Brock commands Onix to use its strongest move, Skull Bash. At the last moment, Red shields Pikachu with his own body, earning the Pokemon's trust. Pikachu retaliates, focusing all its electric energy on Onix, shattering the rock snake into pieces. Red wins the battle, leaving the spectators in awe. Later, Red thanks Pikachu for its help and expresses his desire to become friends. In response, Pikachu shocks him again. Elsewhere, a young girl battles a Pokemon using Hydro Pump on her Staryu. Red witnesses the scene and offers help. He sends out Bulbasaur, who withstands the Hydro Pump thanks to its grass typing. Bulbasaur counters with Leech Seed, while Staryu uses Recover. Both Pokemon regain some health, and together they manage to weaken the opponent, which Red captures shortly after. Red admits he is surprised by this Pokemon. He has never seen one so big. Misty explains that it was a Gyarados, which wasn't supposed to be there. In fact, it belonged to a trainer, but last week someone stole it, and when the Pokemon came back, it was enraged. Red decides to take revenge on the people who stole the Pokemon, but Misty doesn't know who they are. He makes a visual call with Professor Oak to find out more. Oak asks if Red has made progress in his Pokédex, and Red shows him the new data he has collected, including the Gyarados entry. Oak then identifies the thieves as Team Rocket, a criminal organization known for using Pokemon, often for experiments. The professor tells Red that he wants to take action, and is heading to Mount Moon because a moonstone has recently been discovered there. Team Rocket is likely searching for it as well. Red heads to Mount Moon, accompanied by Misty, as it's on the way to her home. Along the way, she reveals that she is a water-type Pokemon trainer. At Mount Moon, Team Rocket is already searching for the moonstone, and won't hesitate to use force if necessary. Meanwhile, Red and Misty arrive and spot the Team Rocket grunts while remaining hidden. They move cautiously through the cave, and since it's dark, they call on Pikachu for light. At one point, Red bumps into what he thinks is a rock, but it turns out to be a Rhyhorn belonging to Team Rocket. A battle ensues, and despite Rhyhorn's rock-type attacks, Pikachu quickly defeats it. The Team Rocket trainer then uses a rare item, a Rage Candy Bar, to evolve Rhyhorn into Rhydon, which infuriates Misty because she believes they used a similar method to mistreat her Gyarados. She sends out Staryu, which deals damage to Rhydon, but it retaliates with Horn Drill, sending water splashing back onto the trainers. Misty faints from the blow, leaving Red enraged. He orders Pikachu to trap the grunts behind a rockfall. Later, Misty regains consciousness, covered in mud. Frustrated, she starts to complain, but Red reassures her and shows her that he retrieved the Moonstone, making the mission a success. The duo reaches Cerulean City, where Misty shows Red her large home. They stop for a meal, and Misty dresses nicely for the occasion. During the meal, Red recounts how he dealt with Team Rocket, but Misty cuts him off, warning him that the grunts they faced at Mount Moon were probably weak, and that the worst is yet to come. Red brushes off her concerns, angering Misty. That night, a massive storm rages in her room, shaking the entire building. However, Red discovers a Gyarados scale, which he takes as a clue. The next morning, Red decides to challenge the Cerulean City gym leader, and Misty offers to take him there. But when they arrive at the gym, the leader is nowhere to be found. Misty then reveals that she is the gym leader, and explains that the storm in her room the previous night was her doing. Red, feeling betrayed, demands a rematch. He sends out his Bulbasaur, but it is quickly defeated. Misty tells him he needs to improve if they want to survive their next encounter with Team Rocket. Red decides to stop battling for a while and focus on getting stronger, even putting aside impressing girls. A few days later, after training and learning from each other, Red and Misty part ways. Red continues his journey and reaches Cape Cerulean, where he sees a young man trying to fix a machine. Unfortunately, the man locks himself inside the device. Later, on routes 24 and 25, Red complains about having too many Pokeballs because he keeps catching Pokemon. He encounters an unusual Rattata that can talk. The Pokemon introduces itself as Bill, a Pokemon expert. However, before Bill can explain further, he is snatched by a Fearow. Red tries to help using his Pokemon, but his first attempts fail since Fearow is flying too high. Eventually, he freezes it, allowing Bill to return to his normal form. Bill explains that he has a Pokemon transporter system that could help Red manage his growing Pokemon collection, but when Red picks up Fearow's Pokeball, it triggers bad memories for him. As Red approaches the sea, he observes the SS Arn. He sneaks aboard, but is quickly spotted and thrown out. He then meets a member of the Pokemon fan club who is passionate about his Pokemon and invites Red to visit their club. After Red's Pokemon are pampered, Red explains that he uses them for battles, shocking the club members. They argue that while battles help Pokemon evolve, they lose their cuteness. Suddenly, a club member bursts in, alarmed because his Exeggutor has been stolen. It's not the first theft, as the club president had his Abra stolen a month ago. Red wonders how such large Pokemon are transported and learns about the SS Anne, which belongs to Le Surge and is used to transport materials to Cinnabar Island. Red decides to investigate the ship again, leaving Pikachu behind to be pampered by the club members. Using Bulbasaur's vines, he sneaks aboard through the back. Inside, he finds a Pokeball, which turns out to be a Voltorb. It attacks, but Red paralyzes it. Soon, an imposing man appears with sailors and demands to know why Red is there. Red realizes this man is Lieutenant Surge, who has been stealing Pokemon to sell them. Lieutenant Surge sends out Electabuzz to attack Red. Luckily, Poliwhirl recovers from paralysis in time to freeze Electabuzz's feet, and Lieutenant Surge himself, allowing Red to escape and hide on the ship. Magnemite patrol the ship, eventually leading Red into a trap, a Magneton. Using Magneton, Lieutenant Surge captures Poliwhirl and throws it overboard, then orders his Pokemon to torture Red, but Poliwhirl evolves into Poliwrath and rescues Red. Together, they defeat Electabuzz, who falls overboard with Lieutenant Surge. The stolen Pokemon are returned to their owners, the sailors are arrested, and the fan club president thanks Red. However, he is disheartened to find his Abra has evolved into Alakazam. On Route 11, a bike race is organized, and Red is one of the racers. Unfortunately, he isn't fast enough, and the first obstacle is a bridge passing over a Tentacruel. There, he meets a triathlete who explains that he can use his Pokemon to get ahead by riding on a water-type Pokemon. Red takes him at his word and uses Poliwhirl to create an ice bridge, allowing him to overtake many racers and take the lead. The next part of the race takes place in the forest. Red considers going around it, but then encounters a bug catcher who tells him about a shortcut through the forest. However, he warns Red to watch out for bugs. Without hesitation, Red dives into the dense forest. Before long, he's chased by Beedrills and ends up exiting the forest covered in stings. Despite this, he finds himself in third place, behind a swimmer and a bug catcher. Unfortunately, both are blocked by a Snorlax, which is preventing access to Route 12. This Pokemon is known to sleep for months. Red tries to catch it but fails. He then sends out his Bulbasaur, which still has Beedrill honey on it, to lure Snorlax. At the finish line, the referee is surprised when the first racer appears to not have a bike. It turns out to be Snorlax carrying Red on its back. Crossing the finish line, the prizes include Poke Dollars, which Red uses to feed Snorlax. In the northern part of Lavender Town, it's raining. Red searches for shelter, but the townspeople refuse to help until he meets an old man visiting the grave of his deceased Doduo. The man invites Red to his house and explains what the Pokemon Tower is, a cemetery apparently haunted by ghosts. That's why Doduo wasn't buried there. Red doesn't believe in ghosts, but when looking at photos of the deceased Doduo, he notices Green, who has seemingly gone missing. It turns out Green also didn't believe in ghosts and went to the Pokemon Tower, but never returned. Red decides to investigate. Entering the haunted building, he's startled by water dripping from the ceiling. Smoke fills the air, and suddenly, a Pokemon approaches, then another, until several are surrounding Red, which frightens him. He tries using Razor Leaf to stop them, but nothing happens, and the Pokemon draw closer. Using Vine Whip, he manages to keep them at bay, and one of them crumbles, revealing it was just a body. Realizing this, Red flees and exits the smoke. Noticing that the Pokemon showing no reaction remain, he then sees Green's silhouette, but with a sinister expression. Green, too, is stuck in the purple smoke. Red understands it's a ghastly causing all of this. He tries to neutralize it, but Razor Leaf don't work on the ghost. However, a gust of wind from Bulbasaur's bulb disperses the Ghastly. Green wakes up and barely thanks Red. Now they head to the top of the tower, where they encounter Acid. A member of Team Rocket appears, introducing himself as one of their leaders, Ninja Koga. He explains that the tower is a Team Rocket base, and a battle begins. Koga sends out his Arbok, which uses Acid on both trainers. They run, and Green has an idea. He uses Protect with his Charmeleon until it faces Arbok directly, and defeats it, leaving Koga stunned. The bait worked, and Koga, who remotely controls Pokemon in the tower, flees, promising to report to his boss. Later, the town is restored, and Mr. Fuji thanks Red. This chapter concludes Volume A. The first thing I have to say is that it's really not bad. It was pitched to me as a very mature and dark adventure, but honestly, it's still Pokemon. Themes like animal experimentation and friendship with creatures have already been explored. Still, I imagine that 25 years ago, when this manga was created, it felt relevant, so I can understand. As for strengths, you have to admit that the illustrator, Mato, isn't afraid to show things. We see decapitated Pokemon, impaled ones, and even decomposed corpses, which is extraordinary for something officially tied to Nintendo. Story-wise, while I enjoyed the episodic structure at the start, I'm less fond of the scattered chapters that feel like fillers compared to the main adventure, just because, in the games, the hero passed through those areas. My impressions might also be influenced by my familiarity with these locations. I much preferred interconnected stories, like the ones in Lavender Town, or when Misty accompanies Red. Speaking of Red, I liked how arrogant he was at the beginning, and it's clear he's very skilled. That doesn't stop him from making mistakes, but for someone destined to beat the league, it's good to see he doesn't start from zero. He even teaches Blue a few lessons, which helps establish him as an iconic protagonist. His first Pokemon being a Poliwhirl is a nice change from the usual starters, even though he eventually gets them too. Regarding the antagonists, it's good that Team Rocket hasn't been made ridiculous yet. They still have their "we have tons of grunts" vibe, as in the games, but they remain a real threat to the protagonist. A touch I appreciated is that some gym leaders are part of the villains. We've already seen Koga, and Lieutenant Surge had to flee. This avoids the usual formula of entering a town, defeating the gym leader, and earning a badge, which would be very repetitive. Before I dive into Volume 2, I want to ask you, what did you really enjoy in the first 14 chapters? I'll try to respond to all comments, so please avoid spoilers. I think this could be a great space to discuss the story's direction. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. See you soon. Ciao.